I was impressed with the thickness of the first night strike plan.
I'm host Michael Allen with Beacon Global Strategies. Today I'm joined by Admiral Mark Montgomery, the Senior Director of the Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation, and a Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. In addition to his 32-year career in the Navy, Admiral Montgomery previously served as the Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and as the Policy Director of the Senate Armed Services Committee when John McCain was chairman. Admiral Montgomery joins us today for a special episode on the rapidly developing situation in Iran, including the death of the supreme leader and U.S. Israeli strikes over the weekend and the outlook for the conflict in the coming weeks. Stay with us as we speak with Admiral Mark Montgomery. Admiral Mark Montgomery, we're really excited to have you explain to us the geopolitical significance of the United States and Israeli strikes on Iran. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Michael.
Well, this will be great here to get your insights with your storied career and your understanding of the U.S. military and how we're approaching the target set. So let's just start there. I mean, I'd love to hear your view on how we're prosecuting the military campaign, but were you surprised that we went, at least the Israelis did, for regime change so fast and right at the top?
And a short answer, no, but I want to say broadly, I was impressed, right, with the, a 900 strike first night Dimpy. That's big time. This combined force, I think that's the terminology we're using of, 150 to 200 Israeli fighters able to generate each day, 75 to 100 Navy fighters, 75 to 100 Air Force fighters, and long-range bombers from the United States coming from the continental U.S., and then both the U.S. Army, Navy, and the Israeli forces able to do ground attack. All of that together was impressive. Now, knowing that, of course, I'm going to hit. I have two priorities on the absolute first strikes. One is suppression of enemy air defense that I know is active. In other words, hitting whatever air defense systems have reconstituted. Because when the Israelis took it out as part of the 12-day war, in many cases they took out a radar here, a launcher there, a control system there, and the always MacGyverish Iranians were able to pull some of those back together. So you want to hit that suppression of enemy air defense, but simultaneously, not later, but right at the same strike, you hit the leadership. Because you had a one-time only chance to catch, 4 or 5 guys on your top 10 bingo card in a meeting. I think they thought there might even be even more, but they definitely got 4 or 5 in one meeting, and that was worth that allowed the timing to change. It also demonstrated that while we like to shoot you, we like to hit you at night, we're more than capable of hitting you during the day if that's what's required, because it was in the middle of the day. So. I was not surprised at the leadership attack, but I was impressed with the thickness of the first night strike plan. And I think that sets if done properly, if this goes to its natural extension, that really set the bar high.
Yeah. Okay. So I heard talk to somebody within the administration who mentioned that the objectives were, of course, regime change. A lot of that is Israeli. And that the United States was focusing on 2 things. One, the military infrastructure to completely eradicate the ability of the Iranians to project force and to destroy this is the third purpose, to destroy any of the vestiges of the Iranian nuclear program that were left over from June or that have popped back up since then. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah. So what I would say, I would kind of categorize it as, leadership, which is the first one, as you mentioned. The second would be their ability to retaliate or, to impose cost. And that would include not just the missile stowage units and launch sites, but also production. And, this is what the Israelis had started near the end of the 12-day war, but had in no way, shape, or form completed when kind of President Trump, out of kind of nowhere on day 12, declared victory. So we need to go back and continue to destroy their ability to produce ballistic missiles. And then I would say the same thing and cruise missiles. And I'd say the same thing for drones. So get that. So that's their ability to impose costs. And then another part of that imposing cost is their Navy and their mine laying capacity and the Navy and the IRGCN's anti-ship cruise missile programs. So all of that's the imposed cost. And then and so kind of think if you do all that, then you're going to be in much better shape. And we're nowhere near done with that. In my mind, this should be at least another 2-week campaign just to do that kind of really hitting all the production facilities and stowage facilities, reassessing them, striking them, reassessing them, striking them. It doesn't mean you have 900 strikes every night for 2 weeks, but it means that you're hitting very consistently every 2 weeks. And the third one was a suppression of enemy air defense, which we did on the first night, and which we'll continue to do.
Paint a picture how this is going on a month from now, a hot war. How could it escalate, and how could it spiral out of control?
I mean, there's not an easy answer to this. But I'd say, first of all, I mean, in our mind, there's a number of strikes that we wanted to do, we and the Israelis together. We'll eat that elephant one day at a time, one airplane at a time, knocking it down over 12 or 14 days. You then, the whole time you're assessing, doing battle damage assessment, adding targets back in. And at some point you're down to, okay, we've serviced every target the number of times we want to service it. Now we're just doing air patrol, satellite, radar, signals intelligence, some overhead flights, combat patrols, looking for the adversary to hit. But those would be ad hoc, not like a 400 plan nightly strike. So, I mean, at some point you get to that there. Now, branches off of that, there is a populist uprising. Now you have IRGC concentrations that you have to go hit, and then it continues, extends. They go all out on, they just kept coming out every day trying to launch a cruise missile into the Straits of Hormuz. We got to go hit those and hit those and hit those. You know what I mean? I can give you branch plans for all the different Iranian responses, but our smooth main plan is to run this for several weeks till we've exhausted our target sets and we've reattacked everything we need to. But the enemy gets a vote, and he can take us down a bunch of branch plans that you have to have. And I'm confident Admiral Cooper, the Central Command commander, has 8 or 10 branch plans that he has I and W on. And, multiple ones can go at the same time too. So he's watching for the indications and warning that, hey, we're getting into one of the branch plans. Here's the authorities I need, or here's the resources I need. Here's what I need to talk about with the Israelis. Execute. And so my gut reaction is he's executing a main plan. He's got 8 to 10 branches, maybe not that, maybe 6 to 8, that he's checking on, and then ready to execute on those as necessary.
This is just a supposition I made, and I want you to check it as a senior flag officer. So I assumed we would do military and maybe the leadership first, nuclear vestiges, but that we would do the so-called instruments of regime repression last, because the president said in his speech, hey, please don't go outdoors yet. There are going to be bombs dropping everywhere. But when we're done, he opens the door to them and says, this might be your only chance in a generation to overthrow your government. Mm-hmm. And so it seems to me if he's going to hit the besieged and IRGC local or whatever local sort of domestic intelligence services there are, he might do those last, because then that sort of opens the door for the people to rush into the streets. But maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter, the sequencing. But what's your take on all that?
Yeah. I'm not sure about that. Look, I think the important sequencing was senior guys first hit, suppression of enemy air defense in that first night, at the beginning of the first night. Everything after that. If we somehow knew where nuclear vestiges were, they would have been in my first strike as well, because that stuff will start moving right away. And that's harder to track. It gets small pretty quickly. That's kind of would have been my first night. This thing on when do I sequence in these? It might be that we're going to get hit. There's so many IRGC facilities, Michael, that we may have to hit them every night.
Okay. All right. Well, then that makes sense. Yeah. So what's your take on regime change everyone's scholars have written it's very hard to do from the air, but we're trying to enable the population as best we can, and we assume they're almost completely unarmed.
What we don't have right now is an armed insurgency in progress in Iran. We have protesters in the streets, but that's not the same as an armed insurgency. Now, it can become one, but a lot of things have to happen if the precursor's been done for that, like the movement of weapons in, things like that, the organizational elements, if Mossad or someone has done that, it hasn't evidenced itself yet. Doesn't mean it's not happening, doesn't mean it couldn't happen. Maybe Mossad has a ace up its sleeve. If it is, I'd start dealing the cards because, we're gonna start hit. If we're gonna hit things hard for a couple of weeks, that's about the time for the political resistance to show itself again.
You don't think this is very likely that they may come back out on the streets. By the way, the students came out last week, which was remarkable. But you don't really foresee the students taking over the government by themselves, not just the students, the protesters by themselves, do you? You believe there has to be a fracture in the regime and a lot of people with guns side with the opposition?
Yes. I mean, I just don't, it's not enough to just be an unarmed resistance. Somebody with guns, whether it's the traditional army, you know what I mean, the non-IRGC army, or someone has to throw in with them, or they have to get access to weapons.
Yeah. Gotcha. Let's say there's a political appointee who looks at a flag officer like you and says the president really wants you to think of targets that would directly benefit the people on the streets. And I need you to come up with these. And if they're neighborhood by neighborhood, maybe we won't do them, but what would your answer be? What would would it be just the besiege and IRGC local, or what would it be?
Yes. I think you'd have to do some kind of estimate of the cost benefit eventually on energy. This is a tough one, right? And President Trump isn't going to hit energy because he possibly thinks some future world friends of his will, be involved in the Iranian energy business, right? And so this might be tough for him personally. But, most of us say, hey, if you hit energy, two things about that. One, later on, when there somehow is a new government, they've got a big bill to fix broken energy. Or two, if you damage the economic lever, the economic productivity, the people feel it before the elites. I'm not sure. There's a third answer, which is if you hit the energy, there's no more money coming in. And at some level, although there's a percentage of the Quds Force that's ideologically driven, there's a percentage that is salary driven. And if you can begin to cut off the tools that they have to do things like that, you weaken the government significantly.
So you would go for the jugular quickly, which is, how do I sponsor a fracture within the IRGC, but maybe generationally, on the assumption that the older ones are already benefiting from the spoils of the system, and if you maybe blow those up and the younger ones see there is no future in kleptocracy, they're more likely to schism?
That's true. Again, I'm told, and I've, it's been a while since I read the exact intelligence on this, but 125 to 150,000 in the IRGC, 25 to 35,000 are true believers. That's a lot of people. In other words, there's a lot of people that got to throw down their arms and disperse, right?
Right. All right. So we've read this afternoon here that there have been Iranian ballistic missile shots at our naval ships. I think I even saw four were aimed at a carrier, presumably the Ford. Now, the whole point of these, right, is to protect the carrier, but how would it work for them to be able to get a shot through and strike one of our Navy ships? What could you put a likelihood on that?
Look, we're really excited when our offensive weapons are 90%. We're like, oh, good. That's a good day. 90% hit their target. That's great. 10% got shot down. I can live with that. We don't feel the same way in defense, right? When you're told, hey, we're 90% effective, most commanding officers are like, what? We were 10% ineffective? What happened with those 10%? Where did they hit? You know what I mean? So, you worry a little bit. Our defensive weapon systems are not 100%. Now, I think the place where we're safest is probably the ships. When it comes to air defense, for a lot of reasons, some of which are luck and a lot of them are money, we have invested, $40 billion over 50 years in developing Aegis, just on research, development, and testing of Aegis, the weapon system that defends our ships. As a result, we actually have good ballistic missile defense, cruise missile defense, and okay drone defense. I mean, by okay, I mean we can shoot drones down. It's just really expensive. So I think that the likelihood of a strike on a ship is much lower than the likelihood of one of our bases getting hit, because there just wasn't enough THAAD and Patriot to spread around. And that doesn't mean THAAD or Patriot aren't good systems. It means that if you have a Navy destroyer, you have a Navy Aegis system guaranteed with you. If you have a air base, you don't have a guaranteed Patriot.
Okay. We'll zoom back out to the strategic here in a minute, but can you put a percentage on it? I mean, let's say you said they're not 100%, but let's say they shoot 10 ballistic missiles and 100 Shahed drones at the Gerald R. Ford. I mean, can we protect against that, or are they very likely to get something through?
I believe that they're in good shape. I don't believe the ships, you can't say never, but I think that's the least likely area for success, would be a ballistic or cruise missile attack on one of the ships in the Arabian Sea with the carrier. To the degree that ships start escorting people through the Straits of Hormuz, if that starts to happen, that's some spicy air defense there, because you're at a very short range, going through a 12-mile wide strait. So that puts Iran pretty darn close to you, and the Iranian missile systems, if they've hidden one and can pop it out real quick. So I know that's not a 100% answer, but I would say I feel pretty good about the carrier strike groups. I'd feel a little spicier about independent destroyers doing convoy duty in the Straits of Hormuz, and I feel even less comfortable with ground forces at bases that have limited or spread thin air defense systems.
Yeah. Okay. So before I get to some of the places where we may be additionally vulnerable, someone in the Air Force put it to me last night that this is probably the biggest U.S. projection of force in the history of the world, and maybe, and obviously, in the history of warfare. Do you sign up to that? Have you seen something like this, at least in the last 50 years?
Not in terms of number of aircraft. I mean, if you think about Rolling Thunder or 8th Air Force in World War II, they're bigger in numbers of aircraft. But in terms of ability to operate at will in an enemy's airspace, this is unique, right? I mean, this assemblage of air power could defeat any other assemblage of air power ever put together, just because of the modern techniques and weapon systems and all that, the modern technology and weapon systems. I mean, in terms of pure numbers, I think there's probably been larger groupings of aircraft. But I take the point there your Air Force friend said, which is that we've never had this much kind of 5th generation, 4th generation plus combat air power ever rolled together than what you have between the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, and Israeli Air Force.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more of our discussion with Admiral Mark Montgomery.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
Okay, so we covered a little bit about the vulnerability of our ships. Let's talk about what else the Iranians are up to. I'll admit that I thought it was unlikely, even though they vowed to, quote, regionalize the conflict. I thought they probably wouldn't go at Saudi and the UAE because why bother? They had enough trouble on their hands, and what payoff did they expect to get? But they did it, and they're going after civilian targets downtown Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Did that surprise you? Do you agree it's a strategic mistake because it took them off the fence and put them in our camp? And what do you think they're doing?
So yes, it surprised me, and yes, for the exact reason you said, that it's pushing the Arab states into at least grudging support, if not and overflight and access guaranteed, and potentially, I would say with the UAE of all states, I could see them. They have no love for Iran. I mean, they might be mad at Saudi Arabia right now, the United Arab Emirates. They have a blood grievance with Iran. Right. So I would not put it past them saying that was not accidental, because that's what the Iranians have claimed. Like, we didn't do that. Some other owner of Shahed drones did that. Okay. I will say one or two of these, not the ones where you see the strike into the hotel, but one of the ones where you come across a flaming datum of like heap of metal. Sometimes that's something got shot down. The Iranians probably did not have tight tactical control. Like, people were like, I have a target set here, I'm going, boom. And, they didn't have the, as we would say, the National Command Authority's approval for everything. But, the fact that they had thought about it, the fact that they threatened it, and the fact that it happened means they own it. And they are going to regret that, because I think at a minimum, the UAE and possibly others are really going to be hard against Iran over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing they'll even request to make a few sorties, but
I think that would be UAE. I'm not sure I'm going to put anybody else in that category.
Okay.
But I put the UAE there.
All right, gotcha. All right, we get so many questions about the Straits of Hormuz. You're the right guy to talk about this. How would it go down? I've heard or read that it would be Iranian submarines putting mines across Straits. Is that right?
They still have anti-ship cruise missiles. And anti-ship cruise missiles tend to hit merchant ships unless they're being escorted by Navy ships that protect them. Very closely escorted, by the way. So that's not on offer right now. So they have some. Just doing one of them would put the the Joint War Council and the other people who kind of control insurance and movements and listed areas would be on edge immediately and begin to shut things down and raise insurance premiums to a degree that shipping stopped. That's number one, is those. Number two is mines. We're going to have to sink a lot of ships and blow up every stowage facility if we're going to stop the threat of mining. They have done it from, I'm kind of joking about a bog hammer, but they've done it from all kinds of non-traditional vessels. And just a couple mines gets, the herd gets spooked, right? I mean, things very quickly get uncomfortable. I don't know that there's any good minesweeping nations left. You know what I mean? It'd be a real pain in the backside. And minesweepers move slow, and you got to protect them, and it'd be a real pain in the backside to do it. So mining would have a significant impact in my mind.
But I've read, for sure the Admiral, but I've read the Navy's obviously been preparing for these contingencies for decades. Yeah. So it would be a few days, and
have we? Now, let's be clear here. Have we been preparing? I just real quick, that your audience probably doesn't know this, but we suck at minesweeping. We're the worst. There's a ship called the Littoral Combat Ship that's like 20 years into its growth, into its startupness, right? We've had them for about 20 years, and we still barely have them functioning as minesweepers, and they're vastly under-equipped. So no. And our other minesweepers are like 50 to 60 years old and generally broken. Now, maybe 4 or 5 days of strikes, and that's everything's a smoking ruin at all the naval bases. They don't have any mines left. That'd be fantastic. I'm not willing to push that button. And if I were an insurer or a shipper or the Joint War Council, I would really be taking a jaundiced view. I'd be taking a very steady, deliberate view of that to make sure that they don't have the capacity to mine it. I think the thing stopping them from mining it isn't the U.S. Navy; it's the fact that it, is the fuel of the Iranian regime, as we said earlier. It's the fuel that it's what fuels the Iranian economy.
Right. Okay. Let's keep on what the Iranians can do. One was the United States. It could possibly get a lucky shot off and hit a naval vessel. They're trying to regionalize the conflict by hitting the Gulf Arabs and others. And they could mine the Straits of Hormuz. What other cards do they have to play? What else could they do other than hitting Israel all the time?
Yeah, they're attacking Israel. I think they've come to realize that's not a good card, right? I mean, the Israelis are probably the most resilient state in the Middle East, and probably next to Ukraine, one of the most resilient ones in the world. So they're probably at this point, with the idea that, hey, this is the U.S. and us doing this together. I think the Israeli people are willing to take the risk that's associated with this. If they could convince one of their proxies to go. I mean, their proxy's got to be like, yeah, this is not a winner, right? I mean, I don't think Hezbollah is like,
right. Time to get in
those last couple rounds of combat did not go our way.
Okay, so let's cover our vulnerabilities then. They've already hit the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. I've read that's the, quote, easiest target for them to hit.
Yeah.
And we did naval vessels, so now I'm talking about actual land. What else? And it seems like we're more vulnerable, and I'm not sure whether we've confirmed where these fatalities were. I've heard some suggestion they might be where American soldiers are in Iraq, and I think that's a soldier training mission. But how do you score where we're vulnerable around the Gulf in terms of our landmass bases?
Yeah, so I would score it this way: that three things go into it. Is the U.S. able to get an air defense system there to protect the base? Patriot, something called CRAM, counter rocket and mortar, which is our form of Iron Dome, which is a phalanx gun and some other things on a truck, and potentially THAAD. Though, if we have our stuff around you, that's pretty good. If it's amplified by a partner, you're in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, countries that have some form of our weapon systems, that makes it even better. And then the third thing's geographic proximity. How far are you from the launch point so that can our aircraft, like for drones, can our aircraft get there fast enough to shoot down the drones? Because our aircraft have to have combat air positions, and not every, when you're only 150 or 200 miles away from the launch point in Iran, that's not a lot of response time. So it's a mix of geography, U.S. capabilities, and the partner host nations capabilities. So the ones that strike you as in the worst condition there are probably the U.S. forces in Iraq, where there's no host nation capability. And some of the U.S. capabilities are limited by our ability to get the footprint in there. And then, you're reasonably close to, Western Iran.
Okay. Russia, China. So I guess China is the one that's most worried here. If their oil, which I think is, they take a lot from Iran, it's pretty substantial. What's the view from Beijing right now? And they're also seeing Donald Trump go wherever he wants all over the world and topple dictators. Tell me how it looks from Beijing.
Well, look, I'm sure Beijing is a little worried about they're most worried about their economy and the oil. I mean, that's got to be number one. Venezuela didn't matter. I know people say, look, they gave a big chunk of their stuff to China, but it wasn't much. From the Chinese perspective, it was a very small percentage of their imports. Iran is different. Iran is a significant part. And, China's been profiteering off the war in Ukraine in the sense that they're able to buy cheap shadow fleet fuel, fossil fuels. But if the overall prices go up, prices are going to go up. It'll impact the Chinese economy. That's number one for China. Number two, there is a credibility issue here. Countries that they and groups they have, that they publicly give support to, are challenged by principally the United States, and China is not supportive. China kind of blends into the background. But I think the number one issue is the economy issue. That's first and foremost. And I don't think that they lose sleep over any of the other ones. Long term, if we actually are solving the Iran problem, like where there's a regime change to something that is more hospitable to the United States, and it, it really turns down the rheostat in the Middle East, then we could pivot to the Pacific and we could legitimately, make that our priority. As
Yeah.
long as, Venezuela is under control. We could make the number one thing the number one thing. We could actually concentrate on China. And, I say that we have been distracted by the Middle East every year since 2012 when President Obama declared we're pivoting to the Pacific. And we, over the last 15 years, have not pivoted to the Pacific. And as a result, we're not we're not doing the proper force posture, lay down, all the deterrence building measures you would normally do to check Chinese power. So that would be the biggest loss for China, would be if we actually were successful. Because then like I said, as long as Venezuela is comfortable, then China is going to be getting all our attention.
No, you're right. I mean, we're always pulled away, and so this could be the enabler in a year or two to have a true pivot. So, how does this look from Moscow? Here they are again. They couldn't help Assad. They can't help the Iranians. I mean, what's
They
going
didn't
on?
help Maduro.
Yeah, of course, Maduro too. So,
Yeah.
how do you think this looks?
And I'll give you one more. Cuba is slowly being choked to death with no help.
Yeah.
Um, I think he's got bigger fish to fry. Um, he's got a bigger problem in Ukraine, which we won't go into here, but I'll just say, he's in the middle of a full-scale invasion that's not going well. That's his number one concern. He got what he needed from Iran. He didn't just get 5,000 or 6,000 Shahed drones. He then got the the plans for a plant, several of which he's built, and he's now producing his own drones. In fact, Iran drones are better than Shaheds. The Iran 3 and 5 are rocket based and go much faster and are a bigger problem for the Ukrainians. So, I mean, I think, when you say Ukraine's fighting four countries, one, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the Iran one is kind of the work is done. So from Russia's point of view, they're not getting much more help from Iran. I think they've gotten a little bit more advice on a few things, but that's about it. To me, from Russia's point of view, it's not a good look to have Iran get beat up like this, but there's really not much they can do about it.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So talk a little bit about, when you talk about how the United States could benefit from the transformation of the Middle East, because we might finally pivot to Asia, but talk about Vision 2030, the UAE and Saudi Arabia and others trying to deepen their economies and grow into AI. So, I mean, is it fair to say this is sort of a short-term blow regarding investments and business climate, but it could be a medium to long-term win?
Yeah, exactly. And the short term could be pretty short. So I think, I think this is what long term they had to resolve. You have to resolve the Iran issue. There's a benefit to resolving the Iran issue for each of these countries. There's other issues that have to be resolved in the Middle East, with Gaza and other things before, you suddenly bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords. But in terms of UAE and Saudi Arabia kind of stepping out with data center production, water, I mean, right now, desalinization plants, if Iran really wanted to hurt these countries, that's where I'd be attacking right now. And that would have an impact, if you were farther along on 2030 and data centers and other things being built, you'd even be in more water extremis and have even more targets to hit. And I'd say the same for power, for power grid, as the electrical power grid as well. So, yes, there's some vulnerability in the short term, but in the very long term, I think this provides a more stable Middle East potentially. Again, I'm imbuing like a positive end result on this.
Yeah. So it's dependent upon there being a
a new regime, or at least one that's more like in the Delcy Rodriguez model. Because it's, the IRGC will still maintain, under your scenario, and I think mine too, the IRGC or other regime rowdies will stay in control to a great degree, right? They'll be
as long as they can.
As long as they can.
Yeah.
Well, as we begin to wrap up here, the big question, of course, is we've all of us who study national security issues or the news, we've seen the supreme leader who's been around since 1989 finally killed. First, just reflect on this, Mark, as a guy who served his country in uniform, who knew all about the Middle East. Just sort of reflect on his demise, and then let's talk about whether this could truly usher in a transformation of the Middle East. So
first, let's be clear. This is under his leadership. It's our intelligence community's estimate that Iran directly contributed to the death of almost 1,000 American soldiers, in principally Iraq, but also a little bit Afghanistan. So no tears. Bad dude, got exactly what he deserved. So I have no empathy there. He's also contributed to Israeli deaths. I mean, there's a lot more on his plate, but just for us, it's enough. I would put him as more culpable than Soleimani, General Soleimani, who we killed in the last Trump administration in January 2020. So from my point of view, I'm comfortable that happened.
Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
That was Admiral Mark Montgomery. I'm Michael Allen. Please join us next week for another episode of NatSec Matters.
NatSec Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. NatSec Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.